Radhe Radhe. Today is Saturday, 3rd June 2023. And here we are. We've just completed our final two verses of chapter 7 in this Bhagavad Gita study series. So here's a recap video being presented by Mummy and me to review that content.
Radhe Radhe.
I'll bring up the screen and show that we covered chapter 7, last two verses, so verses 29 and 30. Before that, we had our usual quiz to review last time's content, chapter 7, verses 26, 27, and 28. As always, please do take a look at the description for this video, and that first link will take you to a page that will help you access these slides and a lot more other reference material. So let's get started then by hearing a rendition of chapter 7, verse 29.
Jara maran mokshaya mam ashritya yatanti te brahma tad vidhu kritsnam adhyatmam karma chakhilam.
So chapter 7, verse 29, the catchphrase here is shelter of surrender. We've seen many times, but especially in the commentary Swamiji presents for this verse, that surrender is an extremely important element to then get bestowed with God's grace. And as Sri Krishna says in the translation for this verse itself, we seek his shelter that'll help with liberation and union as well. So this is a shelter of surrender. As we see in the commentary, Swamiji reminded us that in chapter 7, verse 26, we saw that briefly in class, that we cannot know God just by the strength of our mind or intellect alone. So again, please do go back and take a look at chapter 7, verse 26, all the different quotations that were mentioned from the scriptures, all saying essentially the same thing, that God is beyond the scope of our intellect. We cannot understand or analyze him just with the mind or the intellect. We do therefore need grace from God. And grace is going to come via surrender and bhakti. So that was the reminder here from chapter 7, verse 26. There is the quotation from the Kathopanishad that we heard. And again, that's emphasizing that just spiritual discourses, technical, theoretical knowledge, gyan, or even atma gyan, self-knowledge, self-realization, all those are not enough to be able to get Brahma gyan, which is God realization. God realization is going to come only when God graces us with that. And again, through surrender and bhakti, we will have our hearts purified and as open, eligible vessels to earn that grace from God. We also saw Swamiji's analogy here of, again, water. We've seen that many times, using water as a concept to help us understand some of this explanation. And again, here we see that if we know a little bit about part of the ocean, such as a drop of water, then that is akin to self-realization, self-knowledge. That's not going to let us know or understand the entire extent of the ocean, which is God himself. That's why having that full knowledge of God, that true knowledge, complete devotion and understanding of God is going to be essential through bhakti and earning God's grace. Once we do that, then as Sri Krishna says in the translation itself, we will know him as that formless entity, Brahman. We, of course, would also know him in the personal form and that supreme divine entity. And in addition, the individual self, so the soul that we each are, and also the entire field of karmic action. That's a term we said will come up later, probably chapter 13, where we'll learn more about what that field consists of and who the knower of the field is. Next, we'll look at chapter 7, verse 30.
Sadhi bhutadhi daivam sadhi yagnyam cha ye viduhu prayana kalepi cha mam te vidur yukta chetasaha.
So chapter 7, verse 30, final one for chapter 7. The catchphrase here is governing guideline. The guideline being that Sri Krishna says, if we know him as the governing principle of three new terms that we learned briefly today, Adhibhuta, the field of matter, Adhideva, the celestial gods, and Adi Yagna, the Lord of all sacrificial performances. So if we know Sri Krishna as the governing principle of all these terms, then those souls can actually depart from the body at the time of death with full consciousness of Sri Krishna. As we saw in the commentary, Swamiji has told us here that we all probably can, perceive or know that death is a very painful experience. But to put it numerically in context, he has likened it to being bitten by 2,000 scorpions at once. That's hard to even fathom or imagine, but certainly terribly, terribly awful. And so it's easy to see that, the mind and intellect will not be able to tolerate that much pain, and they're going to very likely stop working even before the soul departs the body. How then can one actually have that consciousness of God? Well, again, as we just saw in the previous verse and even last time, right, we cannot know God alone just through the scope of our mind or intellect. There's more that's needed to it. It's, of course, surrender bhakti and grace from God. Here, that grace from God will again consist of us being enlightened by knowing Him as that governing principle of these three terms, which we shall see in chapter 8. So again, Adi Bhuta, Adi Deva, and Adi Yagna. With that full true knowledge, that complete enlightenment, then one is beyond the pleasures of the body as well as the pain the body has, such as at the time of death. So one is in a transcendental state with a consciousness that is already now much, much closer to connecting and in union with Sri Krishna. So that's the preview we get for chapter 8, where, as I mentioned, Swamiji says these three terms will be explained in detail there. But currently, we're seeing in chapter 7, verse 30, that with that governing principle, one can have full consciousness of Sri Krishna, even at that very, very painful time of death. I'll pass it over to Mummy to enlighten us now with some Sanskrit terms and other concepts.
So, from verse 29, the word I have chosen is ashritya. Ashritya. It's a very important word. It may appear to be very simple. It means to take shelter in. And what does to take shelter in? That means we have to surrender to God. And what is surrender? Surrender is Sharanagati. Sharanagati. And when do we do Sharanagati? When we will understand that Sri Krishna is the Adhibhuta, Adhidaiva, and Adi Yagna. So he is the one who has given us this universe. In this universe, he has given us these 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, space. And he is the one who is giving energy to all the celestial gods who are then running the universe. And he is the one who is giving us the rewards for bestowing the rewards for our actions. So once we understand without any doubt that it is only the soul which is eternal, rest everything is changing at every moment, and the governing person for all this is that Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, then automatically we will be in Sharanagati. So first we have to clear all these doubts and accept and then surrender to that God. And once we surrender to that God, then what do we get? The word from verse number 30 is Yukta Chetasaha. Again, easy word, again something which we have learned previously. But that means Yukta Chetasaha means in full consciousness of Sri Krishna. Yukt means connected. That means all the time your mind is connected. This is the real understanding of this last verse, that when we fully understand that we are only the soul, not the body, then automatically we will not be in this bodily platform, and our mind will always be connected with Sri Krishna, and it won't be then hankering for or lamenting for anything. And that is what Sri Krishna is saying, that you be in surrender, be Sharanagati to Sri Krishna. Only then you can, at the time of death, if you are in that state, then only you can reach Golok, then only you can have full God realization. So over to you, Gagan.
Yeah, thank you, Mommy, for explaining those. And I'm glad you mentioned the word hankering. I did want to bring that up at some point. So let's highlight that live. And we've seen it before, chapter 2 and elsewhere also. But again, let's remind ourselves about that as an important English word to add to our dictionaries. Again, hankering, craving, seeking all those desires for material things. Let's make sure we remember that. With that, we've come to the end of, as I mentioned, the verses for chapter 7. Chapter's done, but the entire journey for chapter 7 is not yet complete, because I know we're excited to go ahead and read about Adibhuta, Adideva, and Adiyagna, but as Swamiji says, they'll come up in chapter 8. But before we get to chapter 8, our effort needed is going to be in terms of the recap quiz that we'll have. In fact, 2 of them. So quiz 1, as we mentioned in class, it's going to cover chapter 7, verses 1 through verse 14. So verse 1 through verse 14 of chapter 7, that's going to make up the curriculum or syllabus for this first quiz that we'll have next week, when we'll see you at the same time, which is Saturday, 10th June, 2023. As always, 8 a.m. Central Time, 6:30 p.m. India time. So again, please do look at the description for this video and join us on the community portal page if you are not already there. In fact, it's a good reminder here that even if you are familiar with the methodology or process, now you can really at length go through the table of contents for the chapter 7 section of our page on the community portal, and look at all the different links there for these individual slides, the reference documents we send, as well as all the recap videos, including this one. So we hope you have a good time the next 6 or so days studying and preparing for the quiz for next week. Again, covering chapter 7, verses 1 through 14. We look forward to meeting you there so much. So thank you, and Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.